The Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire which lasted from the 14th to early 20th centuries. Under the Ottomans, Christians, Muslims and Jews were living together, coexisted in many cities and towns of the empire. They lived separately in their communities, but they were also having common experiences in places like this, where in Athens, where we can see behind me a mosque and a church side by side. People were meeting in the markets, the bazaars, and were having relations, friendly or other relations during the centuries of Ottoman rule. Under an Islamic empire, Christians and Jews were allowed to have their churches, their congregations, their properties, and they were living more or less peacefully with Muslims and with the Muslim community, which were the predominant community under the Ottomans. So churches were allowed, and behind me you can see the Monastiraki church, a small monastery, side by side to the Mustafa Aga mosque in Athens, built in the 18th century. Relations between Muslims, Christians and Jews were not always good. However, in general, we can say that the communities coexisted more or less peacefully during the centuries.
While the relations between all the communities were generally fixed against and within the framework of the pact, the famous pact between Muslims, Muslim rulers and Muslim communities and their non-Muslim subjects, each place, each period had its own specifics. So during the conquest, of course, there was confrontation, and the first decade sometimes saw rising of the non-Muslims against the, or some resistance, or even uprisings, or siding with the enemies of the Ottomans. During the 16th, 17th century, gradually the communities found their ways of living together, probably not very smooth always. Sometimes we have even such explosions of hostility like the new martyrs, but not only new martyrs, confrontation. Sometimes we see very peaceful collaboration about taxes, working in one guild in the market, living together in one neighborhood, although there was the natural tendency of people to live together, to group together around the church or the synagogue. The case of Sofia, for example, shows where Christians at some point had to move out of the center, but their churches remained in the center. So they will be going for services outside their neighborhoods, while the neighborhoods were already building mosques. And we don't see until 19th century purely Christian, purely Muslim neighborhoods. I'm talking about Sofia. There were, however, other places where you see, especially in the 19th century, already a little bit more division, segregation, but let's say voluntary segregation, willing to stay out, not to cause problems and not to receive the hostile sometimes attitude, to meet the hostile attitude. So we can't say that it was always happy living together, but we can't say that it was a very confrontational life together. As I said, being in the market, being in the production of, even buying properties. I mean, people sometimes chose to buy a property in entirely Muslim environment, or a Muslim would buy a house around well, surrounded by Christian houses. Jews were a little bit more careful to stay together, but that's always, there are always exceptions, which prove that there was no established pattern who lives where. There were times in which Muslims get upset and they want the non-Muslims to go out, to be expelled from the neighborhood. But sometimes the authorities sided with the Christians, sometimes not. So it's a variety of cases that we have of living together, which was both peaceful but sometimes loaded with tensions.